Thank you so much for joining us today. I've got Joel with me, and we're going to be talking about digital asset management today. Now, before I jump into the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. My name's Joel Warwick, and I am the Digital Asset Management Innovation Lead at Hyland Software. I'm going to refer to digital asset management as DAM, which may sound odd to some people, but I've been hearing it for so long, it doesn't actually seem odd. I started many years ago in the dot-com years, building, dynamic imaging and color matching kind of services, which we used to call ASP back then. And then I jumped into DAM about 20 years ago. And for the first 10 years, I was doing strategic consulting on different kinds of DAM projects. And then for the last 10, I've worked for a couple different DAM software vendors, including Hyland.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad you mentioned that you're going to start calling it DAM, because I'm really mature, and I still am at the stage in my career where I do a little giggle when I start talking about the DAM solution. So I want to start off with just a little bit of a level setting question to make sure that everybody joining us knows what we're talking about when we refer to DAM or digital asset management. So can you kind of start by breaking down kind of a basic definition for us?
Yeah, so I thought about this a little bit. I think for many of the people that are watching this, they probably have some experience with enterprise content management or maybe document management. So I thought about tackling it from that angle, because there's actually a lot of similarities. So DAM is much like ECM or document management in that it's about storing, organizing, making searchable, and sorry about that, and providing control of the content or the documents, managing the life cycles, making sure you have the right permissions, collaborating, sharing. All that stuff is pretty much the same. Now, Nuxeo itself is actually a content services platform. So that means it can be used for enterprise content management. It can be used for digital asset management. But today I'm really talking more about kind of the DAM use cases. So a lot of value is similar overall. It's really about lifecycle control in the end, right? This document or asset is at drafts state. Now it's at under review state. Now it's approved. Now it's been redacted, or it's under legal hold or whatever, right? And all the business rules and the notifications and expirations. Really important, the permissions, especially in larger organizations. And then eventually you kind of target and you translate those or create versions and eventually publish them and maybe reuse them, right? So all that's the same as ECM. Where DAM is genuinely different is that you've got completely different asset types, different kinds of file formats, a lot of creative formats, like all the different Adobe native formats, images, video, 3D. A lot of them are what we call compound assets, where it's a bunch of files together that represent the individual asset. And that, of course, means you have to have different viewers. You have to be able to view 3D. You have to be able to have, video players. There's all sorts of conversions that have to happen, right? Like kind of formatting and processing and resizing. The files can be huge sometimes, so the system has to be able to work with those, to transfer them and to scale batch jobs. And then I think the biggest difference is the assets generally are not as self-descriptive. So what I mean by that is a document, you can always full text index it. You can always search the actual text in the doc. Whereas you can't do that with an image or with a video. So you have to add data, which we call metadata. It's like the biggest term in the DAM space. As soon as you start talking DAM, you'll start talking metadata, and also relationships. So that's how we find assets, is through this additional data that's been sort of applied to these assets. And then, of course, different user audiences, a lot of external partners involved, agencies, things like that. So, at its root, it's a lot like, ECM in terms of its value to the organization. Now, as a market, it's a really broad and a diverse market space. So there's a lot of different separate use cases within those. And I also want to point out that DAM is most often associated with marketing. It's still the most common use case, but it's not really just exclusively marketing. There are a lot of other opportunities in the actual content value chain. And I'll probably talk about some of those as we go through. So that's what DAM is. It's kind of like ECM for this other set of content, this other set of assets that are used in lots of different use cases that require some special capabilities to manage.
And you set me up for these next couple of conversations as we start going into what are some of those use cases as well. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the role that Nuxeo plays, because you mentioned and kind of talked about it in relation to document management or enterprise content management. But Nuxeo kind of fits this nice mold where it helps do DAM as well as ECM and all these other acronyms that we can throw out. But can you talk a little bit about how it fits into the marketplace and maybe where it's a little different than some of those other solutions?
Yeah, and so glad you asked this question, because even when we talk to potential customers, it's literally the first thing we say, because you can sit here all day and talk about DAM capabilities, and all the other vendors in the space are going to have more or less a lot of the same capabilities. It's not so much about features and functions, it's about sort of how it fits and the context in which it fits. So I like to approach this in like a couple different ways, and I'll try to keep this concise because I could talk about this for 2 hours probably. But a couple ways that that Nuxeo is different. It's a busy market space, even though DAM as an industry is not nearly as large, let's say, as ECM. There are a lot of players in the space, right? And there's a lot of little niche players that, target certain areas. So the first thing is, here are the ways to see if Nuxeo is potentially a good fit. Number one, platform versus packaged tools or packaged services like SaaS services. Nuxeo is a platform. Now, it used to be a platform was kind of a bad, a dirty word. It was like, oh, it's just a toolbox and you have to go build everything yourself. Lots of custom development, blah, blah, blah. Well, today that's not the case at all, because we have much more efficient and reusable low-code configuration interfaces that we can use, so that the vast majority of the implementation is just configuration. And if there is a little custom work here or there, it's usually some very kind of surgical integrations that need to be required to get data from another system or something like that. Now, I want to point out that Nuxeo is a functional DAM from the first login. I mean, it's a working DAM. You don't have to do anything to make it, provide the basic DAM functionality. But what it's really intended for is to be configured to really kind of truly fulfill the use cases in the most efficient way. So the reason when is a platform appropriate? So there's a couple places I think that are important. Number one is to address the complexity of larger organizations. You've got multiple business units or multiple teams that each have their own sets of requirements. And what package tools might work fine for one, but then firms start to hit the wall with those when you have this other team that wants to do things a little bit differently, that has to do things a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is, the vendor shouldn't come in and dictate, here's how you have to work, right? Each team is going to have their own way that they need to work, and the system has to be flexible enough to adapt. And when I talk about different requirements, it's not necessarily different features, it's just how those features work, right? So team A may have the same feature, but it works different for them for whatever reason to meet their particular use case. And one example that I like to bring up is permissions, where, and this is often a limitation of the more packaged applications, is, you've got team A, and they put content in the system, and you've got team B, and team B has a very restricted access to that content. So let's say that they can see it, but it's watermarked. You can only see a low resolution version. Only certain fields are exposed, and maybe you have some functions or actions you can take, but it's very narrowed out. Well, that's all fine, and maybe some of the package systems could allow that, but it's actually more complicated than that. It's actually a conditional situation. That's all true, unless both members are working on a project together from team A and team B. So then if the user is a part of that project, then they have different permissions. And it sounds rather complicated, but these are everyday requirements in larger organizations. This is not the exception. So that's just one example of why that flexibility is really important and where platforms are fit. The next thing that I like to talk about are integrations. So it's the integrations that actually enable the kind of next level of value, right? When the assets are tied to other data in the organization, that's what enables that kind of data-driven decision-making and actually accelerates the process. Otherwise, what ends up happening is the DAM becomes kind of like a file cabinet in the corner of the room, or sometimes we call it an asset graveyard. It's where assets end up, but it's not necessarily where assets are when the work is actually getting done. So these are integrations to product lifecycle management, product information management, master data management, a bunch of other acronyms, project management, CRM, ERP, digital experience analytics. All these are these core business systems that really drive the work of the organization, and the DAM has to be closely tied to those. So that's another reason why platform is to enable those integrations. And then the last piece, I know this is a little long, but these are like the big concepts to get across for Nuxeo, is the flexible object model. So what does that sounds very technical, but it's really the secret sauce. And the fact is that everything in Nuxeo is really just sort of a different type of object. So package DAMs have these predefined asset types: image, video, something like a folder, a collection, maybe a project. And Nuxeo's got all those defaults as well, but they're definable and modifiable. So what I mean by that is you want to create new types of assets. I have a 3D model, or I have this digital raw material or parts, or some kind of a CAD drawing. And these may, again, they may have multiple components. So I need to define the types of assets, or even taking an image. A lifestyle photo may be totally different from a product photo. You may even want it to look different in the DAM, different UI layouts, different fields, different processes they go through. You say, those are totally different teams, the people who work on lifestyle photos versus product photos. So you've got that flexibility to sort of tune the assets to what you actually do. The same is true with the different kinds of containers. So folders, collections, fine, but maybe you want to create something called a project that syncs up with your project management system so that it has the same fields and the same structure. And then the last piece there, and this is where we get into the integration, is these kind of data-only objects that represent data that's usually in other systems. So product information, you may have a PIM system or a PLM system, and you've got SKU number, price, color, that sort of information is in Nuxeo. Now, Nuxeo is not the system of record, but there's a representation of it in Nuxeo. It's almost like an abstraction layer, so that now I can do a search for product information and find all the appropriate assets. And that's just a kind of a microcosm of why those relationships are so important. So it's this kind of flexibility and more open structure and ability to integrate that really sets Nuxeo apart.
Great. So now I want to dive into some of those use cases that we were teasing about there for a moment. So you mentioned the idea that there's lots of use cases within marketing, but maybe can you share where you guys have found Nuxeo providing some strong value for the customers?
Yeah, sure. So my first reaction to this is, well, there is no typical customer for Nuxeo, actually. Even in the same industries, like we have a number of customers that are in the footwear and apparel business, but they're quite different, actually, the way that they're using Nuxeo. But in general, I'll try to kind of summarize. So first off, Nuxeo comes with a UI. It's very configurable, and everything I've been talking about you can do in that UI. But you can also run it what's called headless, so that it's just serving some other user interface, or it's just serving some other system. So we have some customers that do that as well, and some do a little bit of both. So it can be a very back-end kind of a system, or of course it can be right out in front of customers, users, and potentially even downstream consumers. So a couple different cases. The first one is that I thought of is this idea of kind of a unified repository for this group of design agencies. So these are one of these big, I don't know if conglomerate's the right word, but it's a company that owns many different design agencies, mostly for marketing. But this could be applied to like an inside marketing team as well. So they've got all these different sub-agencies. They all do their own stuff. They all use their own tools, but they want to enable reuse across all those different agencies. So what they've done is they've basically, Nuxeo is basically integrated with all those different project management systems, so that when a team wants to build something, they have this great pool of existing content to draw from, whether they're going to actually reuse it or whether it's just for inspiration. Or another example, it's more on the marketing side, is we have some media and entertainment firms that they have to serve up content for licensees. So companies that make cups or t-shirts or toys or whatever, they need to be able to come in and ask this media and entertainment company, hey, I need this to put on my t-shirt. And so they have a little portal they can go into to make those requests. And then that feeds into the system. It actually can create projects because there may be some work that's required to produce that. And these are the kinds of things that these kind of packaged apps just aren't going to serve very well. What someone would have to manually receive that work order, go into another system, do a bunch of manual work. So it's that kind of falls on the marketing side, but there's usually something more process oriented in the use case. Instead of oh, we just need a place to put our stuff, right? Usually goes beyond that a little bit. So that's kind of a marketing realm use case. The other one I want to talk about that I'm maybe a little bit more excited about is this idea of digital product creation. So like I say, we think of DAM, we think of marketing, and that's a very big use case for DAM, but there are lots of other types of content that would be considered assets that need to be managed in organizations. So we've gone way upstream into digital product creation. So these are now the people that are actually building products. So they use digital materials. So it could be, fabric or something like that. It could be a part, could be have like CAD drawings associated with it, formulations, and they build their product, usually using 3D tools, CAD tools, that sort of thing. So there's files that are associated with all that. And these are really rich, valuable assets. So you need a place to store those. You have workflows, you've got reviews and approvals, you've got type permissions on who can access what, and you've got all sorts of relationships between those things. They need to visualize them, all the kind of normal work in progress kind of creative flows. And then it's interesting because you've got this thing that you've made. It is the project, the product, it's the definition. And now it bifurcates, and down one path, it actually ends up going out to manufacturing. It's actually the definition of what to build, right? And then the other path is on the kind of sales, marketing, promotion, support. And that goes down all the way into the traditional marketing. So you've got to do your packaging design. You might do photo shoots, or maybe you just render it from the 3D files and you don't have to do photo shoots, marketing campaigns, e-commerce, etc. And so it's really high value content that's managed well upstream. And now you can facilitate that entire value chain. And what's particularly exciting is in a lot of companies, especially product oriented companies, they're trying to create more kind of immersive customer experiences. This is all the way down at the customer touchpoint end. Virtual showrooms, product configurators, try it on, that sort of thing. And you can't do that if you don't have the actual product designs. Not just some agency says, well, this kind of looks like it, this will be good for an e-commerce site, but the actual design of the product all the way down through there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening there. And there are a lot of use cases, like I say, beyond just that kind of traditional DAM. So I thought those were a couple that I would bring up just to give you an idea.
Especially tied to the idea of like how much press and excitement and hype the metaverse is getting behind it. Just like you were talking about, there's going to be limitations that you start to bump up against when you start trying to play around with that type of emerging technology if you don't have the right tools in the background to support it. So I hadn't even thought of that use case. So I'm excited that you brought that one up, because I think that strikes right with where a lot of the conversations are happening in this world of transformation and emerging technology. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us.
You're welcome.
I want to encourage anybody that isn't already, make your way over and follow Joel on LinkedIn. Check out Nuxeo on LinkedIn or YouTube. I know you guys have got some great videos out there as well, or reach out to either one of us if you guys have any questions. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
If you're looking for expert tips on how to get started with your transformation, or looking to hone in on your approach, make sure that you subscribe to our channel to catch our weekly Digital Transformation Talk series, where we interview experts from around the world on how to make it happen.